Clarice. So welcome. You mind pulling the room? Thank you. Welcome. My name is Barbara Jones, and I represent Mission to the World, the mission sending agency of our Presbyterian denomination. And we decided today to have a broad conversation about missions, and then we'll have some time for Q&A. It's casual. You're going to hear a few TED Talks. You're going to hear from a couple of us who are mobilizing with the intent of raising awareness in the African American space in the church and more broadly within the reform space. And then you're going to hear from a missionary who's raising support, and you may be hearing from one who has served with us, or two or three that have served with us. So we're just going to have a family conversation. Hopefully what you'll take away from this time is a desire to be a bigger voice as it relates to missions, and you'll take away some information about missions. Karen Ellis, I could talk to you about so many things, but for the sake of time, I want to say that Karen is just one of my boos. Mm-hmm. You know, we spur one another on in the way that our brothers have been talking about as they've ministered to us in our spaces. She has a heart for the persecuted church. She's getting a PhD. She's the speaker. She runs the center. There's a whole lot about her that we could talk about. But she's going to be sharing with you today about our story in the history of missions. And then you'll be hearing from our brother, Dr. Naka. And Victor is, for our organization, one of the first times that we have actually hired a national person to lead a ministry in a region where a person really knows about the region. If I can back up a little bit, you know, our history at MTW is filled with colonialistic and paternalistic ideals, but we have been engaged in mission, so we do have a heritage. But it's twisted. And we're praying that God will reshape that by calling us back to the field. And so Victor is also helping us at MTW to think about that and to do that, and particularly in the African space. And will be talking to us about why we're needed in that space. And then you'll hear from Brittany and I, because we both represent missions agencies. I work for Mission to the World. Brittany works for SIM. As we talk about this in our reform space, and especially in our Black space, the numbers are so small, we can't afford to isolate one another. She and I work together on this cause because it's a God cause, it's not an organizational cause. And then you'll hear from Lauren. I just got to pause and say we have one of our first African American missionaries who went out with Mission to the World years ago in this space. And I just want to show you some love, sister. This is Clarice. All right. So first up, you'll hear from Karen, and we'll just keep flowing. We won't stop to do introductions because of the sake of time. Karen?
Yes, ma'am.
We welcome you.
Thank you.
And can you all just, I just want to pray for our time that the Lord will use it to draw and to raise up and to send and to provide financially for this body so that we can send those of us who sense a call to missions. Lord, would you pray for our time?
Sure. Dear Lord, thank you for being our Father. Thank you for choosing us as your sons and daughters. I just thank you so much for this time that we have together to share. I just pray that you'll bless each one in here, bless our time. I pray that your spirit will just fill this room and that you will just share your beautiful journey through all of us. I pray that your love will just permeate each of the hearts in here, and that we will be able to be a part of your global work, and that we will learn more about your global work and where our part is as African American people. We thank you so much for this time. Please bless it in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Thank you, ma'am. Barbara is my boo. One of my boos. And I'll tell you, anytime Barbara is doing something, I am there because I feel a call to hold anybody's arms up who are encouraging us as African Americans to not to enter the mission field and history of missions for the first time. We're not stepping into this stream. This is a stream that has been running. We have a rich heritage and a rich legacy of mission work and expanding the kingdom of God, and it's been truncated several times in our history on these shores. It's been truncated by slavery. It's been truncated first by the Revolutionary War, and then a second time by the Civil War. And it's also been truncated by Jim Crow, segregation among mission agencies in the 20th century, and every single time, people still answered the call. Yes. Newly emancipated people who had gone through HBCUs and felt, did you know that Coppin State University in Maryland is named for a woman who was a missionary on the mission field in Africa? Coppin State College. So we have this legacy, and yet we have this collective erasure of memory as well. There have been places where our names and our histories and the things that God did through us were actually intentionally stricken from records. And so a lot of the people that are here, just by virtue of being here and just by virtue of going, but also intentionally, are going back and collecting our stories and collecting our history and reassembling them. Who have you been told was the first missionary from America's shores? Anybody? Hudson Taylor is who they usually say. Actually, before Hudson Taylor was a man named George Liele. And before George Liele, there was a group of folks named who were led by a woman named Phyllis Wheatley. Who else joined her was a man named Equiano. You've heard his story. They funded and created the original mission effort from these shores. Now, it wasn't America yet. At that point, everybody was either British or African. But it was from America's shores that they sent the first group to Sierra Leone, Freetown. A haven had been created there for emancipated slaves, people who had either run or fought for their freedom or purchased their freedom. And they started a mission work, an effort on the shores in Freetown. So there's a lot of, and locally, John Marin. You have one of these? Look at us. Just highlights along the way of people that God used who overcame incredible obstacles. Every time I think to myself, God cannot provide for this incredible mission opportunity that He's put in front of me, I look at these people who went with nothing. And He's still doing this work today. John Marin was the first domestically to go to emancipated he was born a free man, 1755, rejected and persecuted by his own family because of his conversion to Christianity. His preaching and mission efforts created lasting bonds between African Americans and the Cherokee people. He reached the daughter, the princess of the king of the Cherokees, and then developed a relationship that existed between African Americans and Cherokees. Cherokees actually began purchasing African American slaves so that they could emancipate them. There's a wonderful legacy that we have. So I just want to encourage you, as you take this, take another one with you and pass it around, because we need to tell our stories. Other communities are wonderful at passing on their oral history. Jewish people do this really well. Yeah. They tell their own stories. We need to start telling our stories and then encouraging people, if they did it, and God built incredible and lasting works through them, He's still the same yesterday, today, and forever. Amen. He's still doing that work today. So that's my encouragement for you from the annals of history. And I am going to pass this on to my esteemed brother, Victor Naka. I'm very excited to travel to South Africa in November and help him fulfill a vision that he has, and I'm going to let him tell you about.
Good morning. It's wonderful to be here. Why should African Americans be involved in missions? Because God is calling the whole church to take the whole gospel to the whole world.
Amen.
And perhaps there is no need to give excuses. There is no need to be too particular. If we're part of the church, God is calling us to take the whole gospel to the whole world. But I think there are a few other reasons that are very particular, and I want to share a few of those this morning. One is that you're African, right? You don't need to shy away from the fact that you're African. And for some of us coming from the African continent, the African continent is beckoning. The African continent is calling, and there's need to go in obedience to God, and a little bit of what we heard this morning. There is affinity. There is a like-mindedness. There is a lot that we share in common that should make it easier for African Americans to come and do mission work in Africa. I was thinking this morning, just the shared experience that has many layers, shared experience of oppression, of subjugation. We get it. We understand when we hear about your stories, and you understand when you hear about our stories. When we talk about racial oppression and racial hierarchies, when we talk about the struggles of African women, you get it. When we talk about our mothers and our sisters and the challenges that they face, when we talk about the African church consisting of majority women, and yet without power to do anything. I was saying to Lloyd and the team when they came to South Africa and Zimbabwe on a vision trip a few weeks ago, you look at our rural churches, the one we visited, it's a new church plant, 70 members. Of the 70, guess how many are women? 60.
Yeah.
And they're just 10 men, in this congregation. And yet it's 60 women who have no education. They have never been afforded the opportunity to train for anything. And yet they're expected to lead Bible study, to do discipleship. They're expected to teach other women. And African Americans understand that. We share that in common. But we also share the experience of radical countercultural grace. We share the reality of having to love our former oppressor. We share the reality of having to give another chick and running out of chicks to give. We share the reality of having gone the extra mile and wondering, for how long. We share that reality. We share that reality. And in one sense, we have the same narrative. When we talk about brokenness, we talk about not just the brokenness of culture, but the brokenness of the church. We share that in common. And I think African Americans can have impact on the African context. But here's the African context that you need to be thinking about. There is a lot to celebrate, about Africa. A lot to celebrate about Africa. But there's also a lot that should be of concern. For example, we know the church is growing on the continent. If you just look at the numbers, in the 1900s, 8-9 million Christians in Africa. By the year 2000, 350 million. We now talk of 550 million Christians, in sub-Saharan Africa alone. A lot to celebrate. And we're not just talking about just ordinary Christians. right? 60% of the African continent, the population is under the age of 35. We're talking about many young people in Africa. We're talking about many university students and young university graduates. We're talking about many children and many youth. Africa is a continent of young people. And if you think of that number in the light of the fact that in the next 20 to 30 years, quite easily, Africa could become the epicenter of Christianity. The number is 4 in every 10 Christians in the world will be found in Africa. Right? And that number will be young people, right? Young adults, right? That's exciting. That's fascinating. But then, when you try to then describe this church, a friend, David Zak Nerengir, Ugandan Anglican priest, has written a book, The Church, God's Pilgrim People. And in that book, he describes the African church this way. And this is what should concern us. The African church is strong on Pentecost, but weak on the cross. Strong on celebration, but weak on contemplation. Strong on rejoicing, weak on reflection. Strong on vocalizing, weak on meditation. Strong on power and authority, weak on submission and humility. And this is the reason why the African continent is fertile ground for prosperity gospel. That's the reason why the prosperity gospel movement is having the time of their life on the continent. It is because of this. Strong on the external forms of spirituality, but weak on inner renewal. Strong on the gifts of the Spirit, weak on the fruit of the Spirit. In other words, we're talking about a very weak church. A weak church that needs help. If Africa or the African church becomes the epicenter of Christianity, and the African church is this weak, we have to ask the question, what gospel are Africans going to take to the rest of the world? Some of you have been told, well, I've said this to my white friends, if this is true, it means that your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren are likely to hear the gospel from an African missionary.
Yes.
But what gospel? What gospel when more than 70% of all those who lead this robust church in Africa have no Bible theological training? And then the contradiction that we live with, right? We have thousands of seminaries on the continent, and yet 70% of all those who lead this church have no access to theological or Bible training. And so this is a Macedonian call to African Americans. Come help. Come read the Bible with us. Come do this work with us. So looking for reasons, good reasons why African Americans should come to the continent, I think we have thousands of them. It is about time. It is about time. And here's my last point. If it's true that we have been doing missions for the last 100 years, and our white brothers and sisters have taken the lead, and we're asking the question, what have we produced after 100 years of doing mission on the continent? This is what we have produced: a weak, broken, compromised church. And I shudder. There's a map of Africa I love showing. Showing the changing demographics when it comes to where you find Muslims, right? In fact, in the next 20 to 30 years, there will be more Muslims in sub-Saharan Africa than North Africa and the Middle East put together. And I shudder to think what will happen in most sub-Saharan African countries when the population of Muslims will go up by just 2%. We will see many evangelical Christians being bought into Islam. Easy. Because we have a weak church.
Yeah.
We have church leaders who are bribed very easily. A few years ago, I was involved with the Evangelical Fellowship of Zimbabwe, and we sent a delegation to go and meet President Robert Mugabe, right? Pretty much to read the Riot Act to him, that the church is fed up with you. Guess what they did? They told him how wonderful a president he was. And they all came out with cell phones and a few US dollars in their pockets. And he put a lot of honey in their mouth and they could not speak. So if those are the leaders we have in the church, no wonder the church is this weak. But that is what we've produced over the last 100 years. And so it cannot be business as usual. Something has to change. And perhaps these shared realities among African American Christians and Christian leaders will bring something different to the continent, because we have to do mission differently. Otherwise, we're going to fail.
Amen.
Sure. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you.
So we want to talk about some practicalities. I shared yesterday that I have worked at Mission to the World for over 20 years. It's been a hellacious journey, but I've remained on that journey because I was called on that journey, and I think I was called for such a time as this. And there are many of us in that space. You'll get to hear from my sister here too. But I wanted to talk a little bit about call. We know that we have a history. We know that there is a need. And not only is there a need in Africa, there are needs around the world.
That's right.
Around the world. And several of us in this space have traveled around the world, and we've seen what happens very uniquely when we enter into a space. As I said before, our stories are watched and studied, and when we come and we bring a gospel that's related to Jesus Christ, people are open to hearing about it. It's like, if you can believe about that God, maybe I'll listen to you. So coming to Mission to the World, what I learned over the years is definitely our organization and our denomination has a rich heritage in missions. They've been serving for years. We have over 700 missionaries serving around the world. But the burden is, right now we have one African American missionary serving with our denomination and one that's raising support to go to Europe right now. And so the burden and the challenge, and when I started, I would get to hear from my sister the lament of what it was to be a missionary with MTW, to be disregarded, to be invisible, to have a voice on a team where it might not be as recognized. And I've heard this over and over in the African American, Hispanic American, Asian American context. When we bring missionaries through our organization, it's a journey for them. And so I just want to keep it real. The call is not necessarily to MTW, although we would love for you to come. The call is a kingdom call.
That's right.
It's a biblical call.
That's right.
But the challenge is, because our history has been erased and we don't know our story and our place in the missional journey, we could very easily think that our call is only to our backyard, primarily because there is no access for us to get in. We have real burdens and challenges in our space with finances, and sharing our story in a way that would call the church to give to us. And we have challenges with organizations who have policies and procedures that really are holding up a stop sign when you walk through the door. And so, keeping it real with you, those stop signs have popped up throughout my entire journey. And I've watched people come in of color applying to be a missionary with our organization and very quickly relegated to a position of service in our office. And so we're working on those things. We're having hard conversations. We're challenging the status quo. We're trusting that Revelation 7:9 will take place, and hell can't keep it from happening, nor can people, and nor can God's people. So some of us stay in that space because we believe some of you are called, and we want to be an advocate and a voice to say, answer the call. for those that are thinking about a place like MTW, and you'll hear again from SIM, you're coming into an unfinished work. You're pioneering through the muck to get to the field. But God will use that journey of you walking through to help us change policies. It's a painful space. That's why we have LDR, to patch us back up. It's a very painful space, and it's traumatic for me weekly. That's the real deal. But I know I'm called. And when you are called, it doesn't matter what you feel or what the circumstances are. You press on towards the mark, and you trust God. And so if you know people or you have questions about serving, stop at our booth, talk to me or anyone from our team. And I want to bring Brittany up. Now, Brittany works for SIM. Oh my gosh. You know, I've been in this ministry work for many years, and it's a lonely space. And in terms of answering the call, 3 years ago, we didn't have a missions section at LDR, and we didn't have another black mobilizer, but here she is.
I am so endeared to my sister Barbara, and I can only hope to have the steadfastness that you have shown, and the way that the Lord has equipped you. And I thank you for sharing your journey with me, because as Barbara mentioned, there's so very few of us who are engaged on this side of mission. So the people who are wanting to hopefully inspire and educate and help our brothers and sisters get to the places that the Lord is inviting them into. And so I've been with my organization for 4 years. I first served with them in Lima, Peru for just over a year. And then when I returned to the States, I started in this role. And one of the things that I just want to add to this conversation, I think, is just leading right from the call that we're all invited to participate in, that God extends to all of his children, to carry the whole gospel to the whole world, as was mentioned, is remembering the fact that we are sitting in a position of privilege in terms of the access that we actually have to the gospel. Yes. So there are people around the world who literally have never heard about Jesus. They don't have the opportunity to decide whether or not they believe in him because they don't know who he is. So our responsibility is to share about who he is with those who don't have access to the Bible, access to a church, access to a Christian. And I think so much so, if I can paraphrase a little bit of what Reverend Dr. Ince said this morning, it's not just about our unity, eliminating our differences. It's about our unity eliminating the barriers. And what we see is over and over again, because of globalization, and even as was mentioned, there are people who have recognized the effects of colonization, and how that's been damaging to the gospel. And they're saying, we want people of color that we can relate to come into our places because we're not willing to hear from anyone else. And so, honestly, if I can be so bold, I would say it would be selfish of us to hoard the gospel and to not go where we're being invited and where we're not being asked to come and share about the Jesus that we believe transforms lives. If we really believe that, I'm so glad, I am honored, thankful that I live in a place where someone took it upon themselves because they believed so much in the gospel that they said, I'm not going to wait to share it with you. Whether or not I actually chose to believe it or not, they didn't wait to share it with me. So how dare I just tarry and wait and not go to someone else who is asking, who is this Jesus? If you believe that he has the power to prevent me from a life in eternity separated from him, why would you not tell me about that? So I think that goes into our call. That's what we're answering right now, is not numbers, not statistics, but people who have eternal destinies. And right now, there's so many who that destiny is going to be separated from Christ, separated from God. So how do we invite them into this family, and the joy that we get to experience in the midst of suffering, the joy that we get to experience in the midst of trials. Yeah.
Amen.
That's what I have.
Amen. Thank you. And so we wanted to bring this right down to the rubber. A part of the challenge we have in our church is the barrier of people saying there's not enough financial resources. And so our sister here is going to come and share about her journey. And let me just celebrate with the Lord Lauren, because Lauren left teaching. Well, she hasn't left fully, but she's leaving her job, her income.
Last paycheck was yesterday.
Oh, it's real. She's leaving her sense of security to answer a call. And she's leaving her family. And that's been a journey. She's had to work through that. I've been cheering her on as she's had to have hard conversations with mom and dad, and I know you know about this, and family, and she's answered the call. And so I wanted to give you all a privilege of seeing a present day Black missionary. And I wanted to give you the opportunity, or her the opportunity, to share about her call.
All right. Thank you all for being here. So yeah, Barbara's kind of been like recruiting me for some time. she's been wearing me down, but it's good. It's good. It's been great.
I have that gift.
Yes, yeah. So I have been a teacher for 5 years. I taught elementary and middle school art. So in between time, I would look for opportunities to serve, and I'd been serving with MTW. So I had gone on like trips during spring break, because that was like my longer breaks, and since 2015. So it was just something that was in my heart. Like, I'd be behind my desk at school, and there was just this, I couldn't get rid of that pull, really. I've always wanted to serve the Lord. And yeah, it just would be there, and I'm like, what am I, looking at these emails, like, what am I doing? It just was so strong. And I would kind of suppress it, I admit, because I'm like, I'm in this. My sister's a principal. My mom is like, yes, do your teaching. My sister's like pro-education. And it was kind of hard to break away from that when it feels like your family's rooting for you and they want you to be in that, that realm. They want you to be successful. So that's what I felt. I think I felt that pressure to just be successful, to be stable. And in my heart, it was just saying something completely different. So I finally got to the point where, after looking for trips on my spring breaks, I looked for a larger trip on my summer break. I said, I want to go for a longer period of time to really see what it is that missionaries do, learn more about it, learn more about the Word, because I love studying the Word. So I decided to look up internship opportunities, and I was looking for specifics. I was kind of looking at some that had to do with teaching, but I was like, I think I'm moving away from this. So I was interested in more of studying the Lord's Word, our identity in Christ, and just what it is to be a missionary. And that I found an internship that kind of matched what my heart was kind of seeking. And it just happened to be in Ukraine, which in my mind, first thought was, it's like my brain, I have a map, and I'm like, and then I think about ice. I think about cold, which is my least favorite state of being. I'm actually cold right now, if you can't notice. I'm freezing. So it's cold. And then I thought to myself, there are probably no brown people there. This is awkward. But you know what, Lord? I don't really care. I just like serving you, and I want to learn about what missionaries are doing. So that's why I'm going. So I decided to go on this trip and this journey for 2 months. My sister was a wreck. She said, I'm going to tell you this one thing. I was living in San Antonio, and she said, you're not staying there. You will not go. And I remember talking to Barbara, my mom was against it, not because she was against anything spiritual or the Lord. She was just like, she just doesn't want me to, she just thought I would be traded and sold. They still think that. So they have a tracker on me, literally. And they are really afraid. They're terrified for me. And I'm like, I don't share that fear that you guys have of going. It feels scary that I don't feel afraid. Like, maybe I should be, but I'm not. But they are terrified for my safety as a Black woman in a foreign land. And I get that, I guess. I don't have kids myself, but I imagine if, I try to put myself in my mother's shoes, what would that look like or feel like? So anyway, fast forward to now, during that 2 months, the Lord completely brought both of them to the point where they were like, I accept this. Even though it's scary for me, I accept it. And in that time, the Lord showed me in Ukraine that less than 1% of that population is evangelical. I would be walking down the streets of Lviv, Ukraine, which is where I was serving. I'd be walking down the streets, and all of these people are walking in front of me, around me, riding bikes, taking buses. And I'm like, I feel like I have this gold in my heart. And how many of these, like everybody, just about everybody who I walk by, they don't know Christ in this personal way, you know, or they think there's this thought of, you know, works-based mentality. You know, if I do the right thing, I'm going to heaven. I just felt like it wasn't just. I just didn't think it was right. Just like what you were saying, Brittany, it just didn't feel like it was right. It wasn't right, and it wasn't okay. I'm like, this is not cool. And where are the people? Where are other, you know, Christians? Like, it's just not enough people. So that's what it was for me. It was like the Lord bringing me to this land that I never would have chosen on my own, and showing me, like, there is a need here, and really, like, we all need to be there. Everybody in here, we all need to be there, because 1%, less than 1%, not on my watch. I'm like, Lord, if you want to use me, I am willing to go. I'm in a great place to go, and I want to go, and I need to go. And I've learned in this journey that missions is very expensive, and it's very difficult. It's expensive in a lot of ways. Like monetarily, it's expensive because it's, you know, church is sending us out, and emotionally, and it's just like all these ways. It's hard. So I recently left San Antonio, Texas, left my car, my cat, my brother, my sister, my nieces, my nephews. That was like a few months ago, and I'm still grieving that. So it's like, and then moving back to Georgia and being with my parents and kind of losing that independence that I had as a single woman, just being able to do whatever I wanted to do when I wanted to do it, you know, buy things. And now it's like I'm relying on my parents again. So I say all that to say, you know, I feel confident in my call that the Lord has called me to, and I really need help. I need partners, and, you know, this is one of those things where it's not just me, it's everybody, it's all of us, and it's almost like it's a soldier. You have a soldier on the field, and everybody's equipping that soldier, and you're all a part of that work. And I invite you all to join me on this, and I need financial support to get there, to sustain me. Thankfully, the Lord has raised my getting there, but it's just the sustaining me on the field. So I need you. I need you guys to, you know, help equip me to be a part of this, because it's not me, it's all of us. It's the Lord working through all of us. So,
Amen.
thank you for allowing me to speak.
So Lauren's prayer card is on your chair, and there are options to give online if you sense a call to support her, and access to praying for her is also available via her prayer card. You can actually fill it out and leave it at our booth, or you can hand it to her when you see her over the next course of our time here. Questions? Let's talk, family. Yes, sir, Dennis.
First of all, thank each of you for the work that you're doing. I would say to be on the cutting edge of representing the African American community in cross-cultural ministry. I was wondering if we know how many missionaries we currently have on the field from African American missionaries. Because you mentioned the relationships that exist between the different agencies.
The growing relationship, yes.
You know?
That's usually a Byron question for me, but
Right.
do you have that?
Well,
The question is, do we know how many African Americans are serving on the field more broadly?
Across all.
There's a fellow whose name escapes me. Is it Singleton? Sutherland. Jim Sutherland a guy named Jim Sutherland has a project, you maybe know more about it than I do, that he's working on, where he is doing a census. And I think 300?
Less than 300.
Less than 300 was the estimate.
That's actually higher than I thought. So,
What Jim is doing is he's capturing his information the old-fashioned way, via word of mouth.
okay.
because there are agencies that are not necessarily recognized as agencies, and there are missionaries because they didn't go through an agency that may not be recognized, but they're serving long term. So he's been working on this project for years. Via word of mouth and email and such. I saw another hand.
Well, I was going to say, because of the previous, like whatever you shared, and I'm so glad that there's somebody even in SIM, because I've been to all these mission organizations, and because I came through Bible school and I came to the U.S., and I've always, people would ask me, and I was like, yes, I'm going to go back to Uganda and South. And I got all this training, and I talked to my church. I've been in the PCA since I've been in this country. And yeah, they would say, oh, but you need to serve here and just stay here.
So sad.
And work. And went to SIM, developed a proposal for HIV when monies were coming out. And they told me, oh, but we can't send you because you will live about the life of the people. And I was like, I'm already doing that here. And I said, but what about the others? They do, but that's, like, so everywhere there were roadblocks. Came to MTW, I've been to the Vision Retreat and everything. And so there are several of us who were forced because we couldn't go with the church.
Yeah.
For me, I saw it through my career. You go with government agencies and everything, and you do these things, which is really great, but you can't function as well as an organized church, because that's what the way God made it to be. And there are people there. I go on missions on my own in the summer for that reason, because I've had the contacts and connections to work. And I was in South Korea. Talk about being humbled. It's the only African person of color in the whole group. But they were ministering to North Korean refugees that have been in South Korea. It was a blessing to me. And talk about sharing, I was sharing with them, the young people, my story about believing God and overcoming things that I shared about life in Uganda during the Civil War. I shared about my coming here, and I was part of the Bible teachers, and yeah, they were responding to me they could identify. They could tell I identify. I had stories. I had a connection with the suffering many of them have gone through, and to realize that, yeah, God loves us. It's not, because their question was, you're telling me about this God who loves, but if there's all this suffering that we have to go through. And I said, I was like you when I was 13, and we had civil unrest in my country. And I was 17 when I came to the US, and I was exposed because they are despised in China, in South Korea, even where they have escaped. And I said, but God can love you through all of this and bring you to fruition for what He has created you for. And I was so touched. I felt like I was even more blessed for going than the people that I ministered. So there is a lot of need there's such a connection that God has created in all of us. When we have Christ, there's no place that He cannot use us.
That's right.
Any other questions? Thank you so much for affirming us in this journey.
What does missions look like for a person who has a family? Like, I'm married with 2 kids, and I'm feeling a little bit of tug. I don't know what I'm feeling right now. I got so many feelings. But just feelings in regards to the stage of my life. But I don't know how it looks as a person who's married with kids. Like, how does missions work with that?
Sorry. Oh. Yes, what does missions look like for a family? I love that question, and Brittany, you might want to add to this. But I say church planting in the U.S. versus church planting globally is church planting. Being engaged in ministry in the U.S. versus being engaged in the ministry cross-culturally, it's very similar. Now, the process in getting there The real deal is that the budgets may be a bit higher, but the beauty is you need families. People need to engage with children. They need to see what you're raising a family looks like in a global context, especially as an African American. And there are education resources made available. There are options for the family structure. There are no real rules, if you will. I don't know if that's getting to your question, but you can do here what you can do there.
Well, can I add something?
Yes.
That is not my husband's calling. He is totally a missions
Oh,
field.
now we're getting to it.
Now, he is a total missions field U.S.
Star brand.
That is definitely what he is, for sure. But for me, I think it's a little different, and I would love to go abroad, and I love children. And so that somehow seems to be my path, no matter when I even try to get away from them. So separating from him at times, not like for long periods of time, but like just trying to work missions into my life.
Yeah. You want to say something?
Oh, yeah. So I was just going to add that I think from a short-term perspective, if you're thinking of like a 10-day, a 2-week trip, collaborating with people who have networks in different locations. So, mentioning discipleship needs with African women in these churches, like it could be helping put on a women's conference that helps teach the local believers how to reach out to their neighbors, so that that's something that's effective in a 2-week period of time, but when you leave, it doesn't leave the community that you visited in disarray. Because I think there's a lot of frustration with the way short-term missions has been done, because you're entering into communities without actually, we enter in with this assumption that we know what they need, so we're going to do a project or we're going to do something that we then feel good when we leave. But I do think that there are opportunities where you can go and enter into a place where we've been invited and empower local believers and build up the local church so that it's not damaging when you leave. Does that help?
And one moment, I'm sorry. I agree with Dennis. You start praying for your husband. And what Brittany is saying too is that maybe, because my husband was the same way. My husband was not going to leave the continent. In fact, if I had time, I'd tell you my story. I didn't believe in global missions. I felt like our backyard work was where I needed to be. And that was where I was for many years. I mean, I've served on church planting teams in the U.S. I said I would never go out of the country because God was bringing the people to us. There was no need. But God changed my heart, and he called me. And so what I would encourage you to do, because I've seen this happen over and over again, is pray, as Brother Dennis said, and pray that God would give him a willingness to maybe join you on a trip where he can be used. You know his gifts, you know the kind of things that he's passionate about. Those things are available on a short-term trip, a week-long trip, close to home sometimes. Native American, Latin America for low cost. See if you can get him to join you on a project so that he can see the joy that God is giving you in that work, and pray. And God could change his heart. We see it over and over again. Over and over again. Yes, sir.
Could I just add one other thing?
Sure.
There's a growing term called diaspora missions. And within that context, you have international students, refugees, and immigrants. And so someone mentioned Clarkston, Georgia, but there are other cities here in the U.S., and that's also a strategic way of serving without leaving the United States. But I do know the focus here is to leave the United States.
It's the both and.
Yes.
It's the both and. Sorry.
I had a question about, well, 2 questions. One, what will you have a second job while you're there, or like, what do you do? Because I've never planted a church here, so I don't know what it looks like to plant a church somewhere else. Do you have like a job besides church planting that you do alongside it during the week, or is that all you? I don't know what that looks like.
Specifically?
Yeah.
Okay.
And just generally, like, do you have options for people, maybe if they have a skill
You
here,
can
they
speak specifically and
Yeah.
while they're
Okay.
planting a church?
Yeah, so I am actually I'm joining a team in Odessa, Ukraine, And they already are church planting, but what I will be doing is there's a missionary kids school there that I'd be teaching like one class a week. And I'll be plugging into a new church plant. I think it's a younger church plant that they're kind of building up. Also, but my job will be mostly reaching out to Ukrainian women. So it's a lot of one-on-one mentoring with Ukrainian women and helping with the English outreach. So that'll be my primary role.
And as it relates to missions, there are, even with our organization, and Brittany, you can speak to SIM, but with Mission to the World, we have a variation of options. You can go and do business as missions. We have a ministry by the name of 1826. If you have a profession, you're a teacher, you're in the medical field, you can find work in that country and not fully have to raise support, but your support comes as a means of the work you're doing in the space that you're in, and that work is to connect them to the church plant. And then, of course, you can raise support and live off of that support and be fully engaged in mission as a part of your work. And the work could vary from art to medical to mentoring to teaching, everything.
My company has regional offices.
1826 might be something you would really be interested in, and it's partially developed because we did a study on millennials, and I think encompassed in that is, just the people of color, because a lot of times our parents have invested so much in sending us to college. It's like, we don't want you to just drop everything and go and be a missionary. That's not, so that's just real. So we've thought through what are some ways to get people to the field uniquely. 1826. And Brittany can speak to SIM.
Well, what you shared is pretty similar in terms of there's a variety of opportunities to engage in missions, but I just want to make a case for support. So I think that there's, because a lot of people don't really understand like the support structure and the dynamics, there's what I would say the case for support is that it frees you to engage in missions. So when you're living abroad, especially if it's your first term, you also have to consider this is a brand new location. You're learning the language, you're learning the culture, and all of that is like just physically and emotionally taxing. And so not having to worry about the financial responsibilities frees you to engage in those relationships and building those discipleship unions with people, because it's not, people are not projects, but we look at it as such. So we look at, we're going to do a mission, but you're just living missionally, as we should be doing here as believers, like just being, like you said, at your job. So maybe you have someone who sits at the cubicle next to you and you've been trying to build a relationship. You don't necessarily share the gospel the first time you meet unless you're prompted. And it's very much the same when you're going overseas. And so, she'll be in a new location with a new team as well. And then you said the school, and then reaching out to women. So that's already like 5 things, and learning Russian. So yeah, just to advocate for the case of support is that frees her to do that. And it also frees you to experience, whomever join support teams, to experience God's goodness and his grace through you trusting him with your funds. And I think a lot of people think, I am giving to this mission, I am doing this. It is God reallocating his funds to his children. So you just get to be a means of that if you choose to participate in it.
You want to say something?
Yeah. Well, just to emphasize the point she has made about living missionally, I think in the past we have had problems with missionaries who come to Africa or go elsewhere, who, when they arrive, you almost feel they had nothing better to do, and so they came. And maybe that could be part of the answer to your question. The best missionaries often are the reluctant ones. Reluctant in the sense that there's enough mission work to do here. Why should I go to Africa? And when you go on a short-term mission and you realize you can do in Africa what you're doing here, and therefore, it's not a paradigm shift. You're changing location to continue living missionally, and that's how we, bring about transformation in the communities God sends us to.
And just join my sister. I'm passionate about raising support because it's evangelistic to me, and I'm an evangelist at heart. Any kind of way the gospel can go forth, to me, to deepen our resolve in Christ, to me is a beautiful thing, and I think support raising does that. For me and my work, I'm in mostly white churches. God has, by his grace, resourced the white church. And he's put us in a position where they could be a blessing to his work via the resources he's given them. So there's a call to that space to get engaged with what God is doing in this season, to give sacrificially and to support the work that God is calling us to. And then for us, we spend money on what we want to spend money on. And we look good doing it. So supporting someone for $10, $50, $100 a month, it's a sacrifice, but it also speaks volumes to the people that get to see you engaging in missions as a giver. It's evangelistic. So God's called some of us to go. He's called some of us to send. He's called all of us to be praying. But we all should be engaged in both the local and the global. It's just a matter of how. Question. Give me one. I want to be fair. Is there anyone else that has a question that hasn't already asked? We've got 3 minutes. Okay, so you have a question?
Just one question. I guess because I kind of checked out of mission organizations, but I'm just wondering whether there is any change in the view, because this is a question for you, I guess, because I'm speaking from an African context. Is there any change, like, for example, long-term missionaries, are they going and they train nationals to take on the work? And because for me, that also has been like something I don't understand, because I felt like when Paul went somewhere, he trained able men to take on the work. He trained Timothy to continue on Ephesus. So my question is that changing, especially in the African context?
I think I'm part of the answer, right? I'm not American. I'm not PCA. Yes, I'm Presbyterian. I've never lived in the U.S. I've never studied here. But I'm serving with MTW, right? So that's part of the answer. We have a young couple, Malawian family. They've been in the U.S. for 6-7 years. 2 months ago, they went back to Malawi, and they're doing church planting. We have another South African family who will be going back in February, March. But the only way to do mission in this century is through partnership and collaboration. And that's why we talk of mission partners. MTW works with mission partners in that country to do all these things: church planting, campus ministry, justice and mercy. And that's why, training is a very important component to how we go about doing mission. And why is that important? It's important because when missionaries leave, then the work is not going to die. In fact, with training, it means it's no longer their work, right? That work belongs to the national church, because they're the ones who can make it sustainable. And I would want to encourage you to consider coming back. You don't have to go back to Uganda. You can go elsewhere. Go back as a mission to the world missionary, having raised support, and you can come and enjoy the best of both worlds, isn't it?
And you had a question? I can ask. Oh, time's up. Okay. Well, if you don't, I don't see people stammering about in the hallway. Go ahead and ask your question, and we'll wrap up. Thank you, Cheryl. Oh, yeah. Re-entry. I'll let SIM go first.
Well, the this is recorded, so here we go. I was gonna say, I don't think that it is nearly as substantial as it could be. Speaking transparently, we do have support in terms of when you come either on home assignment or at the end of your term. You have debriefing, resources, and things like that. But as far as ongoing check-ins, helping you reintegrate into life wherever you end up moving after your term, finding jobs, educational resources, etc., we don't necessarily offer that on a systematic scale. Because SIM has so few African American missionaries, I just kind of have the opportunity and the capacity to do it, by myself. And so wherever I can, and because I have networks, I can say, hey, have you heard of something? Barbara does this. Hey, do you know, like, I have this job. Do you guys have anyone? Things like that. But I would say organizationally and structurally, there's nothing in place outside of the debrief. Yeah.
And we do have a reentry program, but I agree, it's not very substantive. I can't get the word out. But it's available to our missionaries when they come back. There are conferences. But before you go out, what we do is try to help you think about what reentry could look like. So if you have a home here and you're giving that up, what does it look like to add to your budget something so that when you come home or when you retire, you're not coming back to nothing? So we think through those things with you before you go out so that when you come back, you have a plan in place. You're not coming back with nothing. And if you have kids, and let's say you go out when they're small, but they're going to college when you get back, we're helping you think about that so that when you do come back on HMA or whatever, we're talking through it. But we don't have that ongoing support. That's a hard thing for agencies. But let me just say that's where the church should fill the gap. The church should be raising up and sending. I'm recorded too. The church should be discipling and raising up and sending, and they should be receiving you and discipling you when you get back. This is part of our plight as we go out and do this work that we're saying to the church. It's a cry for the church on many levels. So, yeah, another prayer request for us. Anything else? Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll have a meetup. I know that some people went to seminars and couldn't be here, and some of you might be with them. We'll have just a meetup after lunch, just conversation, just more Q&A if you want to come and talk a little bit more about this. It's in the same room? Yes. It's in the same room. I think at 12:30. Yeah. So if you want to come back and go a little deeper, we'd love to hang out with you. Thank you. I don't know how to
I'm good. So I'm from Alabama with